Glassmorphism, it's a big word for such a subtle effect, usually found in Adobe Illustrator or Photoshop or Figma designs. It's basically just a clever word for overlappy frosted glass effect thing. And in this video I'm going to show you how to build this exact overlap and frosted glass thing using HTML, CSS and this piece of paper. So we're going to set up the HTML first, then we'll style it over with some CSS. I'm also going to be using Squarespace to build this, but this will work across any platform as long as you've got somewhere to put HTML and CSS. Okay, so first we'll make a couple of divs with some basic content in them. So we'll start by adding a code block. And then we'll add a div to the code block. So left angle bracket, div, class, equals, quotation mark. And we'll give this a class of glass card left. So glass, not class, hang on, get myself all confused here. Let's start again. Glass hyphen card hyphen left quotation mark right angle bracket. Then between these tags is where we're going to add the content. Now you could make the content of this div as complex as you wanted. You could add images or icons or more divs with background colours or whatever. But you came here for Glassmorphism, not a breakdown of HTML, so I'll leave that for another video. So keeping it simple, we're going to add some H1 tags. And then between these tags we'll put a bit of text, any text, whatever you want it to say. And then outside of the closing bracket we'll add some H3 tags. And again, more text. So join me on Twitter. If you haven't already, join me on Twitter. You should. I post ridiculously useful content like blurry pictures, my inability to name classes properly in Webflow, and my incredible artwork. So because we're going to be making overlapping divs, we need another div to overlap this one with. So I'm going to copy what I've done so far and paste it below. Then we'll change the class name to right, and again change the text to whatever you want. Don't worry, I haven't got an online shop to plug. If I did, it'd be full of NFTs of tweets about turning toilets into faces. Okay, that's it for the HTML, so we'll save this. So now we need to style this, and like I said at the beginning, actually I forgot to say at the beginning, but what I should have said at the beginning was I'm going to include all of the code for you to copy. That's where this piece of paper comes into play because I've handwritten the code onto this. So if you send me your mailing address, I'll ship it to you within 3 to 5 business days. Or if you can't be arsed waiting that long, I'll leave it in a post on my website which I'll link to below. Once you've grabbed the CSS, we'll go to your CSS editor and paste it onto a new line. And you should see your glass card left div with the glassy effect. If you're not, make sure that your div class in the HTML matches this exactly. And don't worry about the right div that's buried at the back. We'll sort that out once I've gone over some things you can change with this first one. So all of these properties are just a starter. Feel free to style it as you want as we work our way down through the CSS. Alright, so kicking off with the first few lines, background backdrop filter and WebKit backdrop filter. This is what's given the div its background colour and blur. And you'll see that the background colour is using RGBA, which is red, green, blue and alpha. And it's the alpha channel that's given the background colour its opacity. So if we were to replace this with a hex colour, it'd basically ruin the effect. And the backdrop filter is given the blur effect. This 4px value can be changed up or down, but I think it's a nice amount of blur, so I'm just going to leave this as it is. Okay, moving on to border radius. So this is how sharp or rounded the corners are. So the lower the pixel count, the sharper the corner becomes, the higher, the more rounded they become. You can also use percentages for the radius, so if I remove this and change it to say 50%, you get this completely rounded edges thing going on. I'm just going to keep this at 50px. Okay, border, you might not have spotted it to start, but there's a very thin border around the block, 1 pixel to be exact. And again, this can be increased. Or if you want to remove the border completely, you can just remove this portion of the code. And again, like the background colour, this is using RGBA to give the border some opacity. And text align, not a lot to say about this one. It can either be changed to left, right, or centre. And the padding determines the size of the block by adding space between the content and the edge of the block. Again, this can be made bigger or smaller. Right, the position, this is what allows us to stack things with CSS. So what absolute positioning does is basically lift an element out of the normal flow of a document, in our case the HTML that makes up the rest of the page. I'll leave a link to more information about positioning in the description, but basically this stays the same. Okay, transform. Now this is doing a couple of things here. So the first part, rotate, gives us the option to rotate the block, so we can go in plus or negative values. I'm going to set this to -10, which seems like a nice amount without going over the top. Now this line, translate -80%, even though it's under transform, it's working with this left line underneath to position the block. So imagine that code block we put in at the beginning as a box for our divs. Well, that's exactly what it is, and it's called a parent element, and the divs inside are the children. And when we set a div's position to absolute, it basically lifts it out of the HTML and sticks it to the parent. So anyway, this left 50% value is pushing our glass block over 50% from the left edge of the code block, and translates dialing it back over, so sort of fine-tuning the position. If we wanted it all over to the left, we'd set both to 0. Or you can change either value to a percentage that you want to position it how you'd like. And then margin top, again, we can give this plus or negative values to shift the block up or down. I'll set this to -20%. Okay, we'll look at z-index in a sec, but first I'm going to style and position the second block. So we'll take a copy of everything we've got so far and paste it on a new line outside of the closing curly bracket. Then we need to change the class name to right, or whatever you named yours in the HTML. Then we can shift this around the same way we did with the one above by using translate left and margin top. Now we've got the to position where we want, we'll look at the stacking, which is where z-index comes into it. So think of z-index as layers, with 0 being the bottom of the pile and 1,000,000 being the top. Not that you'd have 1,000,000 things to stack on a web page, but you get the gist. So let's say we want to bring this top one forward. You can see at the moment that they both got a z-index of 0, but the bottom one's at the front. So to bring the top one to the front, we'll just change the z-index to something higher than the one below. 1 will do, because this bottom one's got a z-index of 0. Obviously, if you'd have multiple cards with more complex stacking and say this bottom one had a z-index of 5, but you still wanted the top one to be in front, then again we'd go higher. Okay, that's looking alright now, so let's switch to mobile view to make sure it's okay then. Not to worry, because what we can do is use media queries to style these independently for smaller screens. Again, there's some code for this, and again I'll leave it in the post on my site for you to copy. So we'll drop this into the CSS on a new line. And what this is doing is just targeting devices with a screen resolution lower than 660 pixels in width. So if we go back to the desktop view, you can see it hasn't been affected at all. So again, there are a few things we can change on this. I've reduced the padding because we're on a smaller display, and I've given it a fixed width, but you can change these. Left and transform are centering the blocks this time. And the same as on desktop, the rotate value can be changed as well. And also the margin top to move them up and down. So that's it for this video. Thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you found it useful. If you did, leave us a thumbs up below. If you're not already, consider subscribing to see more stuff like this. And hopefully, I'll see you in the next one. See ya.